environment shrinks on you. People begin to treat you more and more like an object. Your ability to observe and being involved in the action of situations, all that's reduced by the fact that it's difficult to watch other people when they're watching you.
He was once the coldest Sundance Kid Hollywood had ever seen. A masculine icon, a screen legend admired by millions of viewers. People thought he had it all: fame, power, an immortal career. But at 89, just before his passing, Robert Redford could no longer hide what he had spent his whole life concealing. A heart burdened with the scars of love. Behind the golden smile lay countless heartbreaks. Behind the calm eyes lived obsessions that never faded. He was once celebrated, but he also sacrificed. Sacrificed family, sacrificed love, all to hold on to the spotlight. And now those 8 women emerge, not as fleeting starlets of Hollywood, but as chapters of a private life Robert Redford never fully revealed. If you still mourn his departure, leave a like or write R.I.P. Robert Redford as a tribute to this legend, before we look back together at the true journey of his love. Lola Van Wagenan, a love traded for fame. Before Robert Redford became a global icon, before Hollywood ever knew those piercing eyes on the big screen, there was a woman who quietly held his hand through the most uncertain years of his life. Lola Van Wagenan, a discreet, intelligent historian, was no movie star, no shimmering spotlight. But she was the first to believe in Robert Redford's dream. They married in 1958, when he was still struggling to find a foothold as an actor. No lavish wedding dress, no media frenzy, just 2 young souls placing their trust in each other and in the future. She gave him 4 children, building a solid home in the middle of hardship. When Robert Redford landed his first stage role on Broadway and slowly crossed into television and film, she remained by his side. Without complaint, without demand. She was the ground he stood on, the only place of peace before the world knew his name. But then, Hollywood called, and it called loud. In 1969, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid premiered and exploded. Robert Redford became a screen legend in a single film. From there, everything accelerated. The Candidate, 1972, The Sting, 1973, The Way We Were, 1973, 3 Days of the Condor, 1975, All the President's Men, 1976. One success after another, raising him to the ranks of A-list stardom, standing shoulder to shoulder with Paul Newman and Dustin Hoffman. Yet the brighter he shone on screen, the dimmer he grew within his own home. At the height of fame, Robert Redford was always moving, from one set to another, from the Cannes Film Festival to political campaigns. Meanwhile, Lola Van Wagenan, the woman who once held his hand in the dark, now quietly lived in her husband's shadow. She raised the children, upheld the image of family, tried to play the role of the wife behind the spotlight. But the spotlight is not warm. It burns away closeness. It left family dinners empty, children's birthdays marked only by a father's long-distance phone call. In 1985, they divorced. No tabloid fights, no loud bitterness, just a distance that had grown too far to bridge. Robert Redford never spoke ill of Lola Van Wagenan. In every interview, he mentioned her with respect, as though inside him lived an unspoken apology he could never voice. Because without Lola Van Wagenan, Robert Redford might never have become who he was. But the moment he became a legend, she was no longer there. Divorce was not an ending. It was a question mark stretching across the rest of his life. Robert Redford once admitted, "I gave up many things for my career, and not all of them are things I'm proud of." Natalie Wood, the woman too delicate for him to save. After losing Lola Van Wagenan, Robert Redford was no longer the family man. He was still an A-list star, still standing on award stages, still surrounded by thousands waiting for his autograph. But after every premiere night, he returned home, and no one was there to wait for him anymore. In those empty years, he crossed paths again with Natalie Wood. Not through romantic dates, but through memories that had never fully gone to sleep. Robert Redford and Natalie Wood had starred together in Inside Daisy Clover, 1965, and This Property is Condemned, 1966. At the time, he was a newcomer, still searching for footing, while Natalie was already a radiant star, beautiful, sorrowful, with something in her that made people want to protect her. On screen, they were a pair of lost souls. Off-screen, they weren't much different. Natalie often smiled faintly, spoke softly, sometimes sat in silence for hours without explanation. She always made Redford uneasy, not because she was hard to understand, but because he feared that if he touched her too strongly, she would vanish. No one ever knew if there was something deeper between them. They never went public. No paparazzi, no scandal. Only a few times he stood backstage for a long while, watching her walk away. And once, she left her scarf on a chair. Redford kept it. For life. In 1981, Natalie Wood drowned during a trip with her husband Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken. The press ran hundreds of stories, speculating endlessly. But Robert Redford said nothing. He didn't attend the funeral. He didn't appear. He simply disappeared, as if he couldn't bear to see one more headline with her name. Some called him cold, but sometimes silence is the only way to keep grief from being exposed. Years later, when asked about Natalie, he only looked down and shook his head. Not a word. Yet some say that in his study in Utah, that same scarf still rests in a drawer, folded with great care. Natalie Wood was not the woman he once held hands with in public, but she was the one who haunted him the most, because she never stayed long enough for him to hold on to. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part is that he never had the chance to tell her, "You are not as fragile as you think, and you deserve to be loved so much more." Barbra Streisand, the flame he didn't dare to hold. If Natalie Wood was the woman who pained Robert Redford because he couldn't keep her, then Barbra Streisand was the one who hurt him, because he let go. In 1973, The Way We Were premiered. The film became a sensation, not only for its touching storyline, but because everything between them on screen felt too real. Barbra Streisand was Katie, fierce, determined, loving without limits. Robert Redford was Hubble, calm, rational, always keeping his distance. Audiences cried at the ending, but what no one knew was that the ending was also their reality. Barbra Streisand openly admitted she was infatuated with Robert Redford, drawn to his composure, captivated by those eyes that always seemed to be hiding something. But Redford, as always, stayed silent, neither denying nor affirming, just stepping back. There was something about Barbra he could never ignore. She was fire, speaking fast, living true, loving without calculation. On set, her tears were real, her touch was real, her emotions were real. Some moments weren't even in the script. They were simply Barbra, unable to hold herself back. Redford once confessed that while filming a breakup scene in The Way We Were, he turned away, but felt his eyes sting. He said, "It wasn't because of the character. It was because I knew. I was losing this in real life." Barbra Streisand didn't need him to be a legend. She just needed a man who would stay once the lights went out. But Robert Redford couldn't, or wouldn't. He feared those emotions would consume him. Feared that stepping into a relationship with a woman as fiery as Barbra would make him lose control, just as he had once lost his family to Hollywood. So he stepped back, and Barbra walked away. Later, in a rare interview, Barbra Streisand admitted, "Robert Redford was the man I wanted to truly love." But some people are only meant to stay with you in a movie. People still remember The Way We Were as one of Hollywood's most beautiful love stories, but for Robert Redford, it wasn't a role. It was a chance to live honestly, a chance he didn't have the courage to take. And in the end, perhaps what haunted him most was not what happened. but everything that could have happened. If only he had dared to love the way Barbra Streisand once did. Sonia Braga, the passion that made him lose control. If Natalie Wood was the memory he couldn't hold, and Barbra Streisand the fire he couldn't keep, then Sonia Braga was the storm Robert Redford willingly threw himself into, only to find he didn't know the way out. Their story began in 1990, when Redford was 54, not the charming outlaw of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid anymore, but still a living monument, rugged and magnetic enough to make women turn their heads. And Sonia Braga? She was Brazil's most fiery actress, once hailed as the Jane Fonda of South America, a free spirit, a woman unafraid to say what she thought, to love whom she pleased, and to reject every mold Hollywood tried to press upon her. When they met, Sonia had just left a turbulent relationship with director Clint Eastwood. She was overflowing with vitality, seductive in a raw, direct way. Redford, on the other hand, was used to women who were polite, reserved, who talked much about art but hid their feelings. Sonia Braga was nothing like that. She unsettled him, but that was exactly why he couldn't resist her. They didn't need a film to ignite a relationship. Just a few exchanged glances and sunlit afternoons. In Sonia's arms, Robert Redford wasn't a legend, wasn't a director, wasn't the man who had spent a lifetime shutting out passion to stay in control. He was simply a man who was being loved. And for the first time, according to a close friend, Redford admitted something he himself never thought he would say. "She makes me feel like I'm not in control, and I like it. But love with a storm can't last forever." She was too radiant. He was too full of fear. After their breakup, Sonia Braga once said, "Robert is like the mountain he lives on. You can admire him, but you can never live on top of him." There was no wedding, no loud aftermath, just a quiet ending to a love affair, leaving Robert Redford with something he had never experienced before. The feeling of being rejected because he didn't dare to love all the way. His whole life, he had always been the one to take charge. But this time, he stood still and let her walk away. Jane Fonda, the woman. To love is to lose, not to love is to miss. The first time Robert Redford met Jane Fonda on the set of The Chase in 1966, he never imagined this woman would remain in his life for over 50 years. Not as a lover, but as an unnamed longing. At that time, Jane Fonda was at her peak. Intelligent, strikingly beautiful, bold, and full of ideals. She was the kind of woman who made an entire room fall silent the moment she walked in. But unlike so many others, Robert Redford wasn't dazzled. He wasn't enchanted. He was warned. Because in her, he saw too much of himself. A lonely soul masked by confidence, someone carrying too many wounds, yet refusing to let anyone see them. Between them, there was respect, a deep resonance, but absolutely no space for emotional missteps. For Robert Redford knew, if he ever let his heart fall for her, it would never come back whole. They worked together for more than half a century, from Barefoot in the Park to Our Souls at Night. On screen, they were lovers, kissing as if the world had stopped turning. But when the director called cut, Robert Redford returned to who he truly was, reserved, measured, keeping his distance. And at night, alone in his Utah home, he would remember the way Jane looked at him while acting, and quietly tell himself, if only... Jane Fonda once confessed she loved Robert, but not in a way that could build a life. As for Robert Redford, he never said he loved her, but every time they worked together, he was the one who invited her. No one else knew that, except Jane. He didn't need that love to blossom. He only needed it to exist. Toward the end of his life, while filming Our Souls at Night, Jane Fonda suddenly broke into tears after a scene. "I never realized how much he mattered. I thought I still had time to know him better, but no. I was wrong," Robert Redford didn't reply. He simply squeezed Jane's hand. something he had rarely done for anyone his whole life. That moment wasn't love. It was something greater. Because there are people we don't love, out of fear of losing. There are people we don't keep, because we know we never could. And there are people who pass through our lives like a shadow. But every time we close our eyes, we still see them there, clearer than all the rest. Jane Fonda was that kind of woman in Robert Redford's life. A love that never happened, but never disappeared. Katharine Ross, the woman. Right person, wrong time. If Jane Fonda left Robert Redford unsettled because he never loved her the right way, then Katharine Ross haunted him because he loved her just right, but at the wrong time. They first met on the set of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969, a film iconic not just for its script, but for the look in their eyes on screen. Katharine Ross played Etta Place, the gentle lover of the Sundance Kid, perhaps the only one who ever made that cold-hearted outlaw melt. Off-screen, they never dated. No scandals, no confessions. Yet the entire crew admitted there was something very real between them. Robert Redford once said, "There are women who make you feel softer, not out of desire, but because of the calm they carry with them." With Katharine Ross, he didn't need to perform the role of hero. They would sit together during breaks, talking about small things, horses, the landscape, childhood memories. No pursuit, just presence, simple, yet profound. But when the film wrapped, both returned to their separate lives. Katharine Ross was in her second marriage at the time, while Robert Redford was consumed by personal turmoil, losing a child, a crumbling marriage, and fame beginning to overshadow every personal choice. They stayed silent for years, neither ever admitted to loving the other. But in a private interview in the late 1990s, Redford confessed, "Katharine Ross was the woman I might have chosen if I had been a different man in 1969. Not because there wasn't love, but because some relationships, no matter how beautiful, can't survive when neither person is fully themselves." Katharine Ross later found peace with Sam Elliott, a steady, loyal actor. Redford moved through other relationships, other highs and lows, but never once mentioned Etta Place again. And yet, if you've ever watched The Way We Were, there's a fleeting moment when Redford's character smiles faintly at an old flame before quietly turning away. You'll catch a trace of Katharine Ross in that glance, the glance of a man without regret, but who will always keep a small corner of his heart for the woman he could never have. Meryl Streep, the only woman who ever made him afraid. When Robert Redford met Meryl Streep on the set of Out of Africa in 1984, he was already a cinematic icon. Yet she somehow made him feel small. Not because of fame, not because of age, but because of intellect. Meryl Streep walked onto the set without noise, without display, yet every eye followed her. At that time, Redford had just stepped out of a marriage that had lasted nearly 3 decades. In a rare interview, he admitted, "I've worked with many talented co-stars, but Meryl, she was the first who made me focus so intensely I forgot myself." In Out of Africa, they didn't just act. They lived together on the Kenyan plains, among the wind, the sunsets, and silences that stretched longer than dialogue. Meryl Streep embodied Karen Blixen, a lonely yet strong woman, craving love but refusing to be possessed. Robert Redford, as Dennis Finch Hatton, was simply himself, a free man, elusive, yet always afraid of solitude. And so, the story on screen was hardly different from real life. Redford once recalled, "Meryl doesn't just play a part. She dissects the character through real emotion. And when you act with her, you can't hide in performance. You have to be present. You have to live throughout filming. They ate together, rode horses together, even read Karen Blixen's real letters by the campfire at night. Neither of them ever crossed the line, but something lingered between them, not spoken, yet undeniable. After the film, Redford kept his distance. Meryl Streep returned to her own life as a wife and mother, but in the rare moments they mentioned each other, both showed absolute respect. Meryl once said, "He's the kind of man who makes you want to do better, live kinder, not for the spotlight, but for yourself." And Robert Redford, the man famously reserved when speaking of women, once offered her a single line, short yet etched like a mark. "Meryl Streep is the woman who wouldn't let me lie to myself." Of all the women who passed through Robert Redford's life, some left him haunted, some left him regretful, some he never even touched. But only Meryl Streep made him realize, true love doesn't always have to be a relationship. Sometimes it's simply a presence, deep enough to change the way you see yourself. Alejandra Silva, to be loved small and to let go gently. He met Alejandra Silva when he was already past 80. By then, no one believed Robert Redford would love again, not even himself. And perhaps, precisely because there were no expectations left, he found a love that needed no proving. Alejandra Silva, a Spanish social activist, 41 years his junior, entered Redford's life not like a storm, but like a breeze. Gentle, patient, soft. She did not love a screen legend, but a man wearied by love itself. In a rare 2018 interview, one of the few times he spoke publicly about his private life, Robert Redford shared, "I've been through many relationships where love meant struggle, but with Alejandra, I feel loved, without needing to be strong anymore." There was no noisy wedding, no grand declarations to the press. They simply lived together in Utah, the place he once called his last refuge, amid mountains, snow, and the silence he had been searching for all his life. Alejandra once spoke of him with a gaze full of tenderness. "He carries more wounds than people realize, but he doesn't resent them. He just lives on quietly. And I'm here not to change him, but to walk beside him." They tended the garden together, read books, occasionally appeared at environmental events, but stayed far from cameras. No one truly knew how they lived, and no one needed to. Because at 80, love no longer needed to be documented in photographs. It only needed to be lived fully in the short days that remained. Alejandra was the one by his side in his final years, the one holding his hand through silent hospital visits, the one who helped him choose silence over publicity when illness left him struggling to recognize the man in the mirror. And perhaps, she was also the one who placed the last kiss on his forehead when Robert Redford breathed his final breath in Utah at 89. No tears for the cameras, no lengthy statement. Alejandra posted only a single line on social media. "The man I love has now become the wind." Robert Redford had once walked alongside some of the strongest women of his generation: Natalie Wood, fiery and fragile; Jane Fonda, profound and elusive; Katharine Ross, warm but wounded; Meryl Streep, proud yet tender. But at the end of the road, he chose a woman who didn't leave him restless, but left him at peace. Perhaps at 89, what he needed was no longer a great love, but someone who allowed him to be loved small. All his life, Robert Redford walked alongside women who made the world admire him. Yet the more he loved, the more he understood. Not every love is meant to be held on to. Some came to give him hope, some to teach him the weight of loss, and some simply to walk with him through his final winters. Love, for him, was never easy. It left behind nameless silences, sorrows too deep for words, farewells that never truly closed. But he was never bitter, never resentful. Robert Redford loved the way he made films, quietly, persistently, sometimes failing, but always with compassion. When he left this world at 89, people remembered him as a cinematic icon, a social activist, a broken father, a silent lover, a patient husband. But above all, he stood as proof that a heart, even after breaking countless times, can still learn to love again. if we are gentle enough with ourselves. He once said, "To love someone is not to hold on to them, but to learn how not to lose yourself while still keeping your love for them." Now, as his life has closed, we no longer need to see him as a monument, but as a man who once loved deeply, once suffered, and in the end was forgiven by life itself. If you ever admired Robert Redford, please leave a final farewell by writing, R.I.P. Robert Redford, for the man who lived and loved with everything he had. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next emotional, unforgettable stories of the legends you cherish.